the world has ever known. What we call drama was invented here, and in this theatre, plays were produced which hint that there might be exceptions to the rule that the dead stayed in a world of ghosts. There were myths of godlike heroes like Hercules. And people like the Roman Emperor Trajan, celebrated in this very inscription, were even thought to have become gods themselves. Perhaps the most influential Greek idea about the afterlife arose in Athens. About 400 years before Jesus' time, the Athenian philosopher Plato founded a school of philosophy in an olive grove called Academe. And he came up with an idea which still feels very modern. Plato taught that the abstract was more real than the physical, and so a person's soul, their essence, their personality, was more real and permanent than their body. The body itself, said Plato, was a kind of prison. When someone died, their soul was freed from the body, let loose, as it were. So for Plato, death was the way you got out of prison, the prison house of this present body. After death, the righteous souls, which presumably means those who loved wisdom, would go off to a land of celestial bliss. They had different ways of unpacking this. Sometimes they talked about the islands of the blessed, the lovely distant country that people would end up in forever and ever. So there really was, for Plato, a life after death, and it was far better than anything this present world had to offer. It was a powerful idea, and it certainly took off. It was expounded in universities right across the ancient world. Here in Athens was the most important of them. It survived for centuries, until at last it was closed down by order of a Christian Roman emperor. It's perhaps ironic that it was a Christian emperor who finally shut down this academy here, because when I was growing up, most people in the Western Church assumed a view of life after death, which was actually very similar to the one that Plato and his followers would have taught. People went on using the word resurrection, but what they usually were referring to was not an actual bodily life through death and out the other side, but simply a view of a blissful hereafter, exactly the sort of thing that you'd have been taught down here. But in fact, there is a critical distinction between that kind of teaching and what all the early Christians believed. They really did believe that Jesus had been bodily raised from the dead, and that one day God would do that for all of his people as well. That idea was, of course, outrageous to anybody in the classical world. So Jesus' followers were not drawing from Greek philosophy when they spoke of Jesus rising from the dead. And if the ancient Israelite faith wasn't the inspiration either, where then could the idea of resurrection have come from? It could have come from a new strain of Judaism. A radicalizing of the ancient faith was afoot in Israel at the time of Jesus. The rule book of what happens after death was being ripped up.